The demand, I'm just going to go through this very quickly. We talk about demand in Europe, and there is a demand for high skilled. But if you look at different other parts of the world, you actually see that the demand in, for instance, developed Asia, Middle East and North Africa, Latin America, and emerging Asia, that demand is actually increasing more within the next 5 to 10 years. So I think that it's also about time to not only talk about the demand within the mature markets, but really take into consideration the demand for skilled labor in emerging markets. Because that's really who we're competing with, not so much the mature markets. If we just go with that for a moment, this is some data that I was so fortunate to come across when, from a UNDP, and so my area of research is high-skilled labor, so I started looking into that to see, okay, we know how many people are leaving different countries, so how many of these are actually high-skilled? And the result was a bit surprising. Because what I see is that, especially for instance in IT sector, you tend to look at India, you tend to look at China. But what I saw is that when you look at the high skilled, the country by far that sends out the most high skilled is Mexico, and then Iran. You have Pakistan, Philippines, Libya, Haiti, Jamaica, then comes China, and then along the way comes India. Let me just remind you that 40% of the labor force in the world is in China and in India. And they send so few people, I mean, so few emigrate. And at the same time, they have a strategy called Sea Turtles, where they want their diasporas, the talent back to India and China. So I would say that a strategy focusing on emerging markets, and especially China and India, would face a few challenges looking forward. So there is also a necessity to start looking at other countries. If you look at the next generation students, this is also another very great study done by Vivek Vadva, where he looks at the quality of education, but also where the students want to go when they're done with their education. I would really recommend you to have a look at this. It's brilliant. He asked a range of students, so where are the best days for the home economy in the future? Is it in the future or is it in the past? And he divided them between Europe, Chinese, and India. And around 32% of European students think that the country's economy lies in the past, or the best days of the country's economy lies in the past. And very few Indian and Chinese think so. However, the situation is reversed when you look at where is the country's future. Is it in the, where is the best days of the country? Is it in the future? Then Chinese and Indians definitely say that it is in the future. So taking that into consideration, I think that going for countries like India and China would again pose some difficulties. Another good study. This is how emerging market companies are actually struggling with the talent gap. And what the study actually shows is that one thing that happens in emerging markets, these countries tend to overbid each other for salaries, which has created wage inflations for most of the emerging market multinationals. Meaning that, for instance, in Russia, you have salary increases for managers in 1 year, about 60%. So you have this wage inflation, which means that at the moment, it is more difficult and more costly to recruit a manager within the emerging markets than it is to go to Europe or to US, recruit them from there, and bring them back to India or China. It's less costly, and you probably hold on to your talent more for a longer time. So this is also another strategy that you actually see, that a lot of the emerging market multinationals are starting to recruit from the European market. They have a good basis, they can offer good salaries, and the companies are dynamic and growing. So this is another competition that is actually coming across. And I see very few companies, all countries, actually taking this into consideration, that it's not just recruiting from abroad, it's a defend and attack strategy, where we need to defend our own talent mass and at the same time recruit from abroad. Polarization, again, often you see that these global studies where you look at different regions, you look at different cities to see which city or which region is the most attractive. And until now, you've only had these mega studies where you look at, for instance, London compared to New York and Singapore, etc. And I think that the time has actually come to start looking at second-tier cities, such as Dublin compared to Copenhagen, and how we can actually transform these cities into platform cities. This is a study I recently started to do with Saskia Sassen. She coined the term global cities. And now we're looking at what determines, what are the advantages of being a second-tier or a third-tier city? How can you actually compete in a global market when you're of smaller size? So, but before we come to that, I took a look at the Eurobarometer to see where Ireland is actually placed. You have, most of you probably know Richard Florida. And so, who's your city and the importance of location. And most of you probably also know Thomas Friedman, the world is flat. So, these are two opposing theories, that location doesn't matter, by Friedman, and location definitely matters, by Florida. So I think that in mind, I look at Eurobarometers to see, and this is just, of course, European citizens, where do they want to go, and discovered that Ireland is actually ranked pretty low when you look at where European citizens want to go, where they want to work. And I think that following this, a lot of studies show that location definitely matters. But at the same time, what you actually see is that it's not necessary to be a huge player. There are strategies, and there are good strategies when you are a smaller player. You need to develop some kind of platform so that it's attractive for companies to come and settle. Ireland has actually been very good in this respect. But you need to create a platform so that it's easy to operate from Ireland or from Dublin, not necessarily in an Irish or Irish market, but that Ireland and Dublin becomes a platform to operate from for a larger area in Europe. And this is actually one of the best strategies when you are smaller regions that you need to develop. And I have a lot of research on this, how to develop strategies to become a platform city. This is not what the talk is about, but I would love to share some of these with you, because I think this is actually one of the best strategies for smaller areas when we want to compete in a global market. Okay, some of the future strategies. I think one of them is collaborate, where the E should go up. Again, I think that every time we tend to talk about the Global Talent Rally or winning the battle for talent, we're always talking about, so how is UK doing, and how is Denmark doing, and how many more are we recruiting than Denmark, and what's the quality? And I think taking the competition from emerging markets into consideration, I think that we need to look at our competitors as strikingly different than we have done today. We need to collaborate internally, not just in Ireland. Ireland needs to collaborate with the countries around Ireland in order to become attractive, create clusters that are broader, because we need to collaborate, we need to compete with emerging markets now. That's where the competition is, and that's where we would probably lose if we don't shift our focus a little bit. The next thing is that we need to start recruiting much more atypically. I call it recruit unusual suspects. What we see in migration patterns at the moment is that the largest growth is seniors, and these are high skilled, absolutely high skilled. Seniors, that's where we see a growth in immigration. That's a new talent pool. we see that single women, often mothers or just without children, that's actually a group that's growing the most, and these are emigrating from emerging markets. This is a very, very important group, because what we tend to see is that even though there are as many women as men immigrating, the competences, the skill level of women is actually 40% better than the skill level of men. And I mean, that's a factor we need to take into consideration. Women, because it's much more difficult to create a career in other countries, these women tend to immigrate, and this is a great opportunity. Young people, that has always been the case, and then from not the emerging markets that we tend to see, like India and China, but like Mexico or Iran or Bangladesh, we tend to see, or a lot of the islands and many places in Africa. Again, we tend to see that these people are coming from unusual places. So we need to look at these unusual places and see how can their educational levels and structure, compared to ours, how can that match ours? And again, because the quality of labor is actually really, really good in Ireland, we need to have strategies for how we can train and train. In emerging markets, they spend up to a year, sometimes more, training the candidates when they have graduated in order to become labor market ready. And that's just by fact. You need to do that, because before that, they're not labor market ready. And this is, again, when we recruit, this is something we need to have to bear into consideration. We need to train, because the quality would differ, and we can't just recruit someone and expect them to perform from day one. And then we need to access more knowledge about this issue, because the unfortunate fact is that we know so little, and we're creating so many strategies, and we're going in every single direction, and the performance becomes a bit like trial and error. We need to develop more knowledge on this, and this is the reason why I started Center for Global Talent Strategy, and it's a collaboration between Oxford University, Sussex University, and Copenhagen University, and the research is funded by multinational companies, because you can't just go about applying different policies without knowing what really lies behind that. And these are some of the studies we're actually starting off from, looking at the decision pattern of migrants. We're looking at emerging markets. We're looking at the role of medium-sized cities, how to source talent, retention strategies, and how to develop a culture of mobility. These are some of the studies we're starting up right now. Just to finish off, and how much time do I have left? Oh, perfect. Great. Well done. I think that some of the expectations for the future is we need to employ a defend and attract strategy, as I mentioned, to really defend our own talent mass at the moment. And we need to have more knowledge so that our policies don't become so much trial and error, but becomes more research-based. Branding is really, really important, and we need to collaborate on what sort of brands we need to send out. What is the brand or vision of Ireland, and what is it we're recruiting on the basis of? We need to get out of the comfort zone. We need to attract unusual suspects. And we need to benefit from genuine diversity, something that is very much up in the air and popular to say, but not actually to employ. We need to be prepared for the challenges and have different responses to that. We need to have in-house training. We need to know how the diversity is going to affect us and respond to that. We need to collaborate regionally, and we need to obviously know that we're not recruiting family members. We're not recruiting people to stay in Ireland forever. They're probably coming, staying for a few years, and then they're going again. So we need to treat them as guests, pleasantly, but at one point they want to go. So they're not becoming Irish. They're just themselves. I think that was really the end of my presentation. I hope that it wasn't a lot of different knowledge in a lot of different areas, but actually gave you some kind of concise and full vision of how global talent mobility is actually changing and how to compete in the future. And if you have questions, I'm going to be here for a few more hours, so please just approach me. Thank you.